Za'atar is a plant. It is also a delicious Middle Eastern herb blend. I try to, like, every time I walk by the place that I have it, try and touch them a little bit. This year I'm growing za'atar. So za'atar is an herb. It has a flavor profile between marjoram, thyme, oregano. This variety is Oreganum syriacum. I'll write that on the screen or down below. This is a plant that is native to the Levant region of the Middle East. So Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, around that area it grows. It's a wild plant. It grows native. So it's not going to survive any cold weather. It's a tender perennial. For me, growing it indoors, I will probably keep it perennially, just as I do with thyme and with rosemary. But if you're growing this outdoors, I've read kind of a few different pieces of information that says it is hardy to zone 5. I'm really not sure about that. It seems like maybe that's a little bit too cold for it to survive, or at least do well in that area. But most of the information that I've read says it's hardy from zone 8 or 9 to 11 or 12. One of the biggest culinary uses for za'atar is in this spice blend that's also called za'atar. It typically contains like a mixture of thyme, oregano, sumac, sesame seeds. So later in this video, right after I plant some more za'atar plants, I will be cooking with this. I'll make za'atar manakesh. It's this like fluffy flatbread with this herb mixture and olive oil on top. For some growing information, it says there's no special requirements, but germination is typically slow and erratic. I've seen, as I was doing a little bit of research, seen some things that say surface sow. When I was planting this, I did cover it lightly with like a tiny bit of soil on top, and it's come up just fine. And to be honest, I found that the germination wasn't that slow or erratic. A decent amount popped up. I did like sprinkle a bunch in here, but a decent amount came up in like within a week, which is great. Some things take way longer to germinate. This was, you know, pretty satisfying, and I've been leaving it to grow for a little while. I don't have my seed starting area set up, so it's just been by the window. It's gotten a little bit leggy. I also had a lamp on top of it. And typically I do like to have a fan going across my seedlings just so that it makes the plant a little bit more resilient. These have kind of flimsy stems right now because I don't have a fan on them. I try to, like, every time I walk by the place that I have it, try and touch them a little bit. I don't know if that sounds a little weird, but just to build up that strength for them, to make them a little bit more resilient so that their stems don't snap. So I like to sow just a bunch of seeds into one container and then separate them out as it gets bigger. It saves space, especially for these maybe a little bit slower growing plants like herbs. All herbs typically kind of are. They definitely have enough space to stay in this for a while longer. I'm probably going to be separating it out sometime soon. I'm just a little bit worried now that I'm going to break the stems. It's a little bit harder to do when they get leggy, but also something to do when they're a little bit leggy is just bury that like exposed stem at the bottom in the soil. That way it kind of protects them from falling over and breaking, and also just looks a little bit nicer. They're all tangled up now because they're so long and leggy, but I'll get that done quite soon. I might even do it today while I have the time and while I'm focusing on these plants. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about where I'm getting these seeds. I got my seeds from Territorial Seed Company. I've bought seeds from them before and they've all done super well for me. There were a few other places that I saw them. I just trusted this brand. I also saw them being sold on Baker's Creek Seeds, but I am no longer going to be purchasing seeds at all from them. They are sourcing their za'atar seeds directly from Israel. And right now I'm choosing not to support any company that is supporting Israel. Israel's actions are causing a huge humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. They have been occupying Palestine for almost a century now. So the violence against Palestinians, the horrible conditions they're made to live under are nothing new. And this escalation recently is just something that should be condemned by everybody. If you've been following the news about the humanitarian disaster that's been going on in Gaza, you'll know that the US, the UK have cut funding to UNRWA. UNRWA. This is the UN agency that was created specifically for Palestinian refugees. In 1948, there was the Nakba, which in Arabic means the catastrophe. which was the violent mass expulsion and dispossession of Palestinians from their land. The Nakba is something that didn't start in 1948, it didn't end in 1948, it is ongoing. These Palestinians that were forcibly and violently removed from their land are not able to return back to their homelands, to their own properties, their family properties, their family homes, their family farms. And the Nakba, of course, was condemned by the UN. Every year, the UN also condemns the illegal settlements that Israel is implementing in the West Bank and the military blockade that has been ongoing since 2008 on Gaza. UNRWA is one of the biggest source of aid for these Palestinian refugees who have nothing. Their land has been taken away from them. All the fertile land, most of the fertile land in Palestine was taken by Israel. There's so many restrictions on the things and the people that are able to come in and out of Gaza. Fishermen are not allowed to fish more than a certain small distance away from the shore, and now not at all. These people have no homes anymore. In the last couple of months, 50% of all buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. There's over 1 million people just crowded into these dense areas now in tents that they're setting up. There's not nearly enough food for them, and they rely on aid just day by day to survive. So cutting the funding for it has been just a massive blow. It's one of the biggest sources of aid for these people. They cut funding literally the day after the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, ruled that Israel must prevent genocide and they must allow more aid to get through. So all that to say is there's no way I'm buying seeds from Baker's Creek, who is supporting that government that is doing this, who every day you hear more and more genocidal language coming from the politicians' mouths. And truly for me, the fact that billions of dollars are going to this government in war and military support is terrifying. I'll do the little things that I can. I encourage all of you that want to do something too and that buy seeds on a regular basis to not buy from Baker's Creek as well. Send them an email, send them a letter asking them not to source their seeds from a state, from a government that is committing genocide. Most importantly, contact your representatives asking them to reinstate funding for UNRWA. I'll also link below some charities that you can donate to. I saw on social media there's protests from Israeli citizens not allowing aid to get through. They just don't want those people to have anything, and it is just a really horrifying state of inhumanity. I definitely subscribe to the notion that we are at a point in, civilization where we have the technologies to allow every single person on this earth to live comfortably and with dignity. And it's just, I don't know, incredibly disappointing, incredibly sad that we can just allow people to suffer in this way in a lot of different places. I know it's not all just in Palestine and in Gaza right now, but this is something that our country is supporting with full force in billions of dollars. Okay, now that rant is done, I'm gonna go ahead and start making the za'atar manakesh. Let me just clean up my workspace, get all the ingredients ready, and I'll show you how I do it. It's a very simple recipe. Okay, I'm putting my hair up for this just because I'm gonna have to use my hands. Please excuse my double chin that you're going to inevitably see as I do this. So I'm gonna start off making the dough. This is supposed to be, you can use any bread recipe, but let me just tell you how it's supposed to end up. It's supposed to be a light, fluffy dough. You roll it out into a flatbread. There's a lot of different recipes you can use. Just Google Middle Eastern dough recipe if you're interested in that. I'm gonna be making a slightly healthier version, maybe. That's what I read. And more importantly, a much quicker, easier recipe. So I tried this, I cooked this the other day and it turned out really well. The bread was not as flavorful as I remember it being, so definitely use your own recipe if you're not interested in this. Literally, there's just two main ingredients to this, which is self-rising flour and yogurt. So the self-rising flour is important because you want it to be fluffy. The yogurt also helps to make it fluffier. And you don't need to leave it to rise, or you're not putting in any yeast. What is it called when, dough rises? You let the yeast do its work. You don't need it to proof So the recipe calls for equal parts of self-rising flour and plain yogurt. I'm using plain Greek yogurt. I'm putting in a tiny bit less yogurt because when I made this before, I noticed that it was really wet, the dough was, and it was very hard to work with. And I ended up adding actually a bunch more flour, but then I was thinking maybe that's why the bread didn't taste as good. Did I put too much flour in it? We'll see. I don't know much about baking. I'm not an expert baker or bread maker, so. And then just mix the two ingredients together. I'm gonna use my hands in just a second. But it's very wet now and everything just ends up sticking to your hands. If it's too wet, add more flour again. Oh, some things also to add to this are salt. I think I missed that last time. I don't know how much salt. Salt's always such a pain for me to measure out. Because how am I gonna crank that thing into like a little teaspoon? I'm not gonna do that. I'm also trying to figure out if there are great like neck exercises I can do to get rid of this double chin. If you guys know any, let me know. Okay, it's coming together. It's definitely a dough. I think I am gonna add a little bit more flour so it doesn't stick so much to my hands when I'm working with it, or I might also oil my hands. I'm also gonna add, I'm gonna be shaping the dough on this surface. So I'll add a bunch of flour there. And don't be afraid of kneading this dough because it's self-rising flour. Something about the gluten, how it has a, like I think a lower gluten quantity, so kneading it is better. Okay, this is what it looks like. It might honestly be too sticky. I might be adding more flour to it as I start to work with it. Maybe too much flour. And I don't have a rolling pin because I don't cook very much. So rest assured, if you see any recipe from me, it's an easy one. If I can do it, you for sure can do it. So I'm just gonna take a handful of this dough and press it out into the shape that I want to. Oh, also a few things I forgot to do. Preheat your oven to 350. Have a baking sheet out with some parchment paper on it. Okay, and it's super difficult to work with this dough, so gonna be adding in more flour. Okay, let me try this again. It's not perfect, but it's kind of flat and it's kind of circular. So I'm just gonna finish up the rest of these and then I'll show you what I do. Here's what I ended up with. Are they perfect? No. Will they taste the same? Yes. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is make the za'atar and olive oil mix. I'm gonna eyeball this, but I think a good ratio of how much za'atar and olive oil to use is 1.5 to 1. 1.5 of this za'atar mix and 1 of the olive oil. And this was the olive oil I was using to dip my fingers in to work with this very sticky dough. I found that actually to make it work best, I spread olive oil on this before each one that I pushed out. And that helped it to not stick so much. Okay, sorry, I just had to clean up a little bit. So yeah, za'atar, olive oil. And you can go ahead and break out your nice olive oil for this. I don't have any, so I'm just using like my general one that I use for like all cooking. Okay, you can do this however you want, really. If you like olive oil, put a little more if you don't want it to be super thick with the seasoning, but this is how I like to use mine. This is the consistency of mine. And then I am gonna go ahead and spread this on top of each like round of this dough. Again, this is going to depend on your taste preference, how thick you want to lay it on, but just know it's a lot of flavor, so you really don't need to put a lot on. You can spread this quite thinly, and you can always add on a little bit more after it's done cooking. Okay, I'm actually going to make 2 of these with cheese. That's also another way I used to eat manakesh, so you can have za'atar manakesh, and then you can have cheese ones. But I'm just using the cheese that I have on hand, this Mexican style blend. The oven is preheated to 350. I'm gonna put this in maybe for 12-15 minutes and see if I need to add a little bit more time after that. It really depends on how thick you rolled out or, you know, pressed out your dough. So I'll see you after that. And if you have any extra of this, like blend, the za'atar and olive oil, you can use this to dip any dough that you have around if you like eating bread just on its own, which I do. Or another really yummy way to do this is just to dip fresh vegetables in it. You don't even need the olive oil in it. If you just dip it into the powder, if it's a fresh vegetable and it has a little moisture on it, it like sticks to it and it's really good. Okay, these are in the oven for I think 16-17 minutes. And they could maybe go a little bit longer, but I think these look perfect. This is how it looks on the bottom. The dough seems a little bit white and not golden, but this is how I remember it looking from when I was a child. I could probably wait a little bit longer for this to cool, but I'm pretty impatient. I'm gonna go for this small one. And this is how I remember eating it, just folding it in half and eating it kind of like a sandwich. So good. It's exactly how I remember eating it. The dough is a little bit different. This time is better than the first time that I tried it a few days ago. And I think it's because I stuck more closely to the 1-to-1 proportion of flour to yogurt, although I did still use more flour, certainly. Very yummy. It's a good vegetarian dish too. I am trying to eat a little bit less meat. I am trying to eat a little bit healthier. And this seems good. I mean, even though it does have like olive oil slathered all over it, but olive oil is supposed to be good for you, right? I am super happy with how this turned out. The taste of the za'atar is exactly what I remember, even just the scent of it from when I opened this jar. I hope you guys try it, even if you don't make the za'atar manakesh, if you just end up trying this herbal blend. It's really yummy. Really great with just vegetables dipped into it, fresh vegetables. I'm so excited to start growing tomatoes and cucumbers again so I can do that. But that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.